Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a pivotal 400-year-old work by the poet John Donne. Now, you probably know him for his sonnets, but this isn't about love. It's a story of loyalty, religion, and a political choice that could literally cost you your life.
To really get to the heart of what Donne was writing about, let's just start with that question. Imagine being forced, truly forced, to choose between your religious allegiance and your loyalty to your country. For English Catholics back in the 17th century, this wasn't some thought experiment. It was a devastating reality.
So to understand why Donne even got involved, we first have to get a feel for the incredibly tense political and religious climate of early 17th century England. You had a new king, you had a new loyalty test, and it was tearing the nation apart at the seams.
At the center of all this chaos was something called the Oath of Allegiance. King James introduced it, and it created this profound dilemma for his Catholic subjects. It basically forced them to declare under oath that their number one loyalty in all worldly or temporal matters was to him, the king, and not to the Pope. As you can imagine, this sparked a fierce pamphlet war, with thinkers on all sides just going at it.
This right here, this captures the core conflict perfectly. On one side, you have the Pope, claiming authority over both spiritual and worldly affairs. On the other, King James I, demanding absolute worldly authority within his kingdom. For English Catholics, this wasn't just some political squabble. No, this was a fundamental clash between two massive, powerful claims on their ultimate loyalty.
So, into this powder keg of a debate steps John Donne, a man with let's just say, a very complex religious past of his own. How did he get involved in this high-stakes national fight?
Okay, so Donne's personal history is absolutely crucial here. You can't understand his argument without it. He was born into a really prominent Catholic family, but later in life, he converted to the Church of England. This gave him this unique, deeply personal perspective on the whole crisis. His argument in Pseudo-Martyr wasn't just some intellectual exercise. It was a declaration of his own identity.
And he made that declaration in 1610. Now, you gotta understand, this wasn't just another book. For Donne, this was his public debut, his very first time in print. It was a totally calculated move to define his new allegiance and, as we're about to see, to launch his new career.
So what did Donne actually argue? Well, his first line of attack, it was not subtle. It was a direct, sharp, and fiery critique of anyone who refused to take the oath. The core thesis was simple and direct. English Catholics could, and in his view, should, take the oath of allegiance to the king. He jumped right into the debate, backing the Crown's legal arguments against influential Jesuits, like Robert Parsons, who were telling Catholics to refuse.
What's really fascinating is the language Donne uses. He doesn't just disagree with the Jesuits, he frames their position as politically dangerous. He calls them enemies to the dignity of all princes, which is basically him saying that refusing the oath isn't an act of religious piety, it's an act of political rebellion. It's sedition.
And to really hammer this point home, Donne makes this powerful historical comparison. He likens his opponents to the Circumcellions, a violent, extremist Christian sect from way back in late antiquity. By drawing that line, Donne was branding anyone who would die for the Pope's cause as a false martyr, a pseudo-martyr.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Beyond all these political attacks, Donne offered a much more subtle and in many ways a revolutionary idea about where the true authority for this kind of decision actually lies. See, Donne argued that this oath had fundamentally changed the game. It was no longer possible to just passively obey, whether it was the king or the church. The oath, by its very nature, forced every single Catholic to make a conscious individual choice. The burden of responsibility was shifted away from the institution and placed squarely on the individual's conscience.
And he even lays out a kind of hierarchy for how to make this choice. He says, look, the foundation has to be scripture and natural law. From there, the final judge, the final arbiter, is your own individual conscience. And that means you have to tune out the political arguments of the state and even the complex, case-based reasoning, the casuistry of the church. For Donne, the ultimate authority was you.
So what was the result of this bold, complex argument? Let's take a look at the impact of Pseudo-Martyr, both for the country and, well, for Donne himself.
Well, the book was a success on a few different levels. It definitely served the king's political purpose, and it influenced other thinkers. But on a personal level, it was a massive triumph for Donne. It basically launched his career as a clergyman in the Church of England and cemented his public identity as a Protestant intellectual.
So this work really represents a turning point. It was so much more than just a contribution to a political debate. It was the moment the great love poet publicly became a major religious and political figure in England, using that powerful intellect to carve out his own place in the world.
And all of this leaves us with a pretty provocative thought, doesn't it? Donne's 400-year-old argument, with its radical focus on individual conscience over institutional authority, it forces us to ask a timeless question. When does obedience stop being a virtue